As natural wood species go, redwood is in a class of its own. A sustainable alternative to tropical hardwoods, redwood is grown and harvested to the highest environmental standards in the world. Named for the dark red heartwood at the center of the tree, redwood imparts natural beauty, warmth, and durability to interior and exterior building applications, including decking, fencing, paneling, siding, exposed beams and timbers, pergolas, and other shade structures. To learn more about redwood from Humboldt Sawmill, please visit getredwood.com.
So I think thinking about like building science, thinking about programs like DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes and Energy Star, getting trained in how to build to those standards so that you can build better, but also so that you can get that tax credit, it's very important.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Senior Editor Brian Pontalillo.
Hey everyone.
Producer Andres Samaniego. And special guest Heather Clark, Director for Building Emissions for the White House Climate Policy Office. Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Heather, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Can you first tell us what you do, Heather? Because I'm sure a lot of our listeners and myself are very curious.
Sure. So I oversee the White House's climate policy for the building sector. I'm basically touching anything that has to do with buildings, climate, housing, and trying to transition the building sector to the clean energy economy.
And I have to ask, do you just get a phone call from the White House one day asking you to do this kind of work? What prepared you for doing this for the White House?
Sure. I did get a phone call one day asking to do this kind of work, and
I should keep my hope up, right?
Right. I was shocked and extremely excited. I mean, what an opportunity to get to work for the Biden administration in this important time of history. So in terms of kind of like where I came from, I've always been passionate about buildings, even as a little kid. I think second grade, my favorite show was This Old House. And I loved buildings, wanted to be an architect, and then started becoming concerned about environmental issues and didn't really see how housing and buildings could fit together with what's happening with the planet. So I ended up having a few really important experiences. I saw a house as a high school student that was a passive solar, all built with materials from the land, from the location. And it was the small home, most beautiful house I ever saw. And I started to realize that we could combine kind of our environmental concerns with my interest in buildings. And then from there, I ended up working in affordable housing for many years. I led the first large-scale deep energy retrofit in the US. I did one of the first power purchase agreement companies for solar, lots of other projects, but all managing building projects, construction, and seeing how climate and construction can go together.
Wow, that's really interesting. So where were you doing affordable housing development?
Sure. So many years ago, I worked for a company in Boston, the largest affordable housing developer in the country. I created their green building program and ended up leading some really important affordable housing projects, ranging from taking historic mills and turning them into beautiful affordable housing that was also LEED Platinum. But it's always this combination of affordability, equity, as well as really solid building science, making sure that we're building our buildings so that they're comfortable, so that they're affordable, but also good for the climate.
It's actually that's if we can just stay on this for one moment, it's kind of an issue that's become more near and dear to my heart over the time that I've done the work that I do, and I'm wondering if you could sort of say it. And because I've always been curious about this, I think often when we think of affordable housing, we think of subsidized housing. And I'm curious, like, what's your definition of affordable housing, and if there's sort of a nuance there between, like, subsidized housing, housing, to with the intention of keeping costs low, versus like just builders choosing to find ways to build more affordable housing for a different sector of the market.
Yeah, great question. So when I was working and doing my affordable housing work, I was working on subsidized affordable housing. So properties that are 60% below median income for underserved households. However, I think that as we're thinking about this clean energy transition, especially with single family homes and other homes, really trying to figure out how do you build housing in a way that is affordable, and trying to keep costs low so that it's not always your higher end housing that you're building. And we're in such an important time in history, I think, both with the climate crisis, but also with the need for more housing in this country, which is so urgent that we need to figure out how to really design it in a way and build it in a way that Americans can afford to live there. Do you mind if I share an example of a home that I found?
Not at all,
inspiring?
please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in my job, I get to work with all sorts of sectors of the real estate market. So I get to talk to people that own skyscrapers. I also get to talk to Habitat for Humanity and local builders who are building really great homes. There's a home in rural Alabama that was built, Opelika, Alabama, built by Rural Studio and Habitat for Humanity. They built two homes very close together. And those homes were built to be super energy efficient. So one of the homes was built to Passive House standard. The other was built to DOE Zero Energy Ready homes. They were built for low-income families. They were all electric, built with heat pumps, mini splits. They were also built with on-site solar. And then, to be even more important, they were built to building code. Here at Alabama, lots of storm events, especially the climate crisis. Those homes were also built to have to the fortified, high resilient wind standard. So when I think of a home like that, I get really excited because it's about making sure if there's a large storm event, if people lose power for an extended period of time, that family is going to be comfortable in their home. They're going to be safe. And they're paying almost nothing for energy bills. That to me is affordability. That to me is like the future of where we want to go with housing.
So how do we get there? How do we do that? How do we make more of those homes?
I know that's my job, figure out all this policy. So that's why I feel like talking to you is so important today. You're touching so many builders, and there's so many listeners that are building homes and thinking about like, what is that home of the future and what does that look like? So in terms of the Biden administration, we've done a lot of interesting work lately. So a couple of years ago, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Both of those have brought hundreds of billions of dollars to help with this clean energy transition. And a lot of that money is going to the building sector. And I can go into a lot of depth on what that looks like, but just to keep it high level for now, we also have set a goal to make zero emissions new construction and retrofits common practice by 2030. And what does that mean for builders? It means we're in the process right now of defining what a zero emissions building is. Pretty soon you'll see a national definition for zero emissions building. We've got an input from thousands of stakeholders. We'd love to hear from builders right now. We have a request for information on the street. But when we think about what a zero emission building is, it has three criteria. The first is the building is highly energy efficient, whether it's a new construction or retrofit. The building has no on-site emissions. So for a home, that means that it would use a heat pump. And then the building is powered by clean energy, either on site, if you can maximize solar, or if perhaps you're participating in community solar. And then the fourth component is making sure the materials have low embodied carbon. So thinking about, insulating with cellulose insulation, which actually stores carbon, or wood fiber insulation, and picking your materials in a way that is really responsive to climate.
Can I ask you a follow-up question to that, Heather? So, what is the Biden administration hoping to do to encourage buildings being constructed like this? How are they going to get that done?
Sure. So lots of different levels. I think the first is that there are really robust incentives that are starting to come to the market, tax credits, rebates, that are going to help make it more financially feasible to do the work. The other part is that we're doing a lot of work on training, which I'm happy to talk more about, but really trying to help builders to move in this direction. There's such good work that has already been done. Like, one of the reasons why I wanted to be on this podcast is Fine Homebuilders here always highlighting the best in building science, the best in building practices, and we're trying to make those common practices across the market. And then we're also trying to make sure that products are brought. I think I need water. Hold on a minute. I get very excited when it comes to building, so hold on. It's also about making sure that products are available for market, whether it's the best insulation that's available or heat pumps. So we're doing a lot of investments to making sure the supply is there so that you can have affordable materials, affordable products for your home site, which has been especially important given that inflation and interest rate environment that we're currently in.
So I think that likely a lot of what you're mentioning, especially when you mentioned rebates and tax credits, relates back to what you had the Inflation Reduction Act, which you mentioned earlier on, and we've had lots of people sort of express their I wouldn't say confusion about the Inflation Reduction Act, because that's not necessarily fair, but like sort of just wondering, how do I really understand how to work with this? So like for our audience, mostly single family residential builders and designers and professionals in general, like what are the things that you'd really like for them to know? Like what are the most useful aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act that it would be great for them to understand?
Sure. So for new construction, if you're building new homes in the country, the opportunity is the 45L home energy the 45L energy efficient tax credit. That provides up to $5,000 per home that is achieving DOE zero energy ready home. If you achieve passive house, which is even better, you automatically would qualify for that tax credit as well, because that program has zero energy ready homes embedded in it. If you build to the Energy Star standard, you get a $2,500 tax credit. And that's for single family homes. If you're building multifamily, those tax credits look a little bit different, whether or not you're building with prevailing wage. So the 45L tax credit, I think, is a huge opportunity. Another great opportunity is the 48E investment tax credit, which is allows you to do solar on buildings. If you're building in a low-income community or a low-income household, you can also apply for the 48E little e tax credit that can provide, it's a competitive tax credit, but it can provide up to an additional 20% tax credit on top of the 30% tax credit, meaning you could get up to 50% for the cost of solar for a home.
Can I ask you a question? So
yeah.
The credits are for the homeowner, right? And this would help builders because they theoretically temporarily own the home. Do I have that correct?
So the 45L is for the builder. It goes to the builder. The 48E can also be used for the builder. Now, for the 48 tax credit, you can also use that for things like geothermal, storage, and other elements within a building. So those are tax credits that go more towards the builder. For homes, like say for a remodeler, or if you're doing for a remodeling job at a home, there are the 25C and 25D tax credits, and those go to the homeowner, and those are separate. But the 25C energy efficient home improvement tax credit provides the homeowner up to $3,200 on their remodeling job to do things like insulation, air sealing, heat pumps, better windows, electric upgrades. And then there's the 32, there's also the 25D residential clean energy tax credit that provides that homeowner of an existing home up to a 30% tax credit for doing renewable energy on their home. In addition to the tax credits, there's also the rebates, and the rebates are being offered by states. Those rebates have not gone live yet, and you'll be hearing a lot more about the rebates once they start to go live by the states, but they provide funding for electrification, heat pumps, panel upgrades, hot water, heat pump hot water heaters, insulation, air sealing, whole building envelope work. And those rebates will be going live within the next year, depending on which state you live in.
I've heard with the states being responsible for managing those programs, have all the states signed on to participate? Do they have a choice? Are some better equipped to be handling processing these rebates than others in your experience?
Sure. So right now, Department of Energy is in charge of the rebates, and they are working with the states to sign the states up. So that will be, the states have to decide whether or not they want to do the rebate programs. These are great resources, though, for homes. So we're really strongly encouraging states to sign up. So far, we have 4 states that have signed up. We have Hawaii, New Mexico, New York, and California, which are in the process, that have submitted their first application. We're right now working on a daily basis with more states to help sign them up. And then those states will then be designing and implementing the rebates in those states. But very quickly, we anticipate more states will be signing up. We're working with them, like I said, daily to help bring those resources to states across the country.
It's a ton of money, right, yeah. Heather? Am I right?
It is. Yeah, it is. So like for electrification, it's up to $14,000 per home to do electrification for, and that the electrification rebate is geared towards lower income households. And then there is a whole building home energy efficiency rebate that's up to $8,000 per home, depending on whether or not you're a lower income American or not. So it's a lot of resources, a lot of money that is going to help energize this market.
That's great. I think you mentioned a few moments ago, you mentioned that there's money also for training. And I think you told me when you and I talked earlier that that's also something that is going to be in the hands of the states. But it seemed like there were some good opportunities there. I don't know if I have that right, but tell us a little bit more about training opportunities for building professionals.
Sure. So there's lots of different opportunities happening with training. And so through the IRA, there are incentives available to the states to help with training. And it's happening at many different levels. So training is happening, with auditors. Training is happening with contractors and builders to do whole home energy improvements, as well as really specific improvements such as heat pumps, and learning how to get those skills. There's some great examples across the country that might be interesting to hear about. In Maine, for example, Maine's community college set up a heat pump training that has been really highly successful. A few years ago, the governor of Maine set up a challenge of 100,000 heat pumps installed in Maine. Cold climate, and they ended up meeting that challenge well in advance of the deadline that they set for themselves, and now they've doubled that challenge. But the fact that they're working through the community college, there's training of young people. There's also training of people that are mid-career that want to do something different. The National Climate Advisor, my boss, went up to Maine, met a father and son team who had gone through the heat pump training program in Maine, and then ended up going out on their own to start their own business. Another example of a training in Baltimore, we got to go to see a site called Requity, which it's a partnership between the Baltimore Vocational High School and where students are learning how to build zero energy homes by renovating an existing boarded up brownstone. And the students are learning through hands-on how to build to zero energy by taking this boarded up building and making it a beautiful zero energy home for a low-income family.
If you could wave your magic wand with regard to training, or maybe the Biden administration already has a way to answer this, but like what is lacking in the training for trade workers right now that we should be doing to help them be better prepared for a change in our energy infrastructure and a big change in how we heat and cool buildings?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're also working really closely with the unions and the trades on training too, which is really important. In terms of the magic wand, oh wow! I mean, I think I would love for every builder to have time. I mean, I think training not only is a cost issue, but it's also, can you take time out of your day to do it when you're out building a home? I'd love to see every builder get trained in basic building science to understand the opportunities. Insulation and air sealing, really as basic as you can get. But if you do a thorough job on your insulation and air sealing, now your mechanical systems, whether it's a heat pump or another system, it can be tiny if you've really focused your resources and time on that envelope. So I think thinking about like building science, thinking about programs like DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes and Energy Star, getting trained in how to build to those standards so that you can build better, but also so that you can get that tax credit is very important. And then thinking too about how to integrate heat pumps, which are a newer technology, making sure that they work in the buildings that you're building is going to be very important to achieve that zero emissions building. And then thinking about low embodied carbon materials and those choices that builders can make, really simple choices to use materials that are oftentimes bio-based, that have that can actually store carbon and have really low emissions when you make them, and trying to choose those materials for your home and do it in a way that's affordable, so that if you have that proper training, you can make a choice that is not going to break the bank, that actually could potentially save you money when you're building that home.
So
Heather, a number of states have, or cities, I should say, in California, have enacted legislation that has made it easier to build accessory dwelling units. Affordability is such a huge conversation in our world. Are there efforts at the federal level to kind of foster additional building of ADUs and other infill kind of development?
Sure, that's a great question. So there has been a lot of work through the White House's Domestic Policy Office, and also working with HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to really increase the number of homes that are able to build. And so there's been work on incentivizing, trying to incentivize affordable homes. And when I say affordable homes, I'm not talking necessarily, there's subsidized homes, but there's also lower interest loans that are available for new construction and new homes. They've also worked a lot on zoning and trying to encourage cities and states, as you mentioned, to allow for smaller homes to be built, thinking about infill, some more novel ways of building and construction. And those are all absolutely being encouraged by the Biden administration.
What were you going to ask, Brian?
Well, so many questions, but to stay related to this topic, one of them is about sort of it seems like maybe another missing piece of the puzzle towards helping people get to being able to build and live in particularly more energy efficient houses and keeping the costs down, for the real estate market to value operating costs. And so is there anything on the federal level, is there anything, and I think that makes sense, right? What I'm asking, like, is there anything happening on the federal level so that can become part of the equation when someone, when someone applies for a mortgage and they want to spend a little bit more, knowing that their house will cost them less to live in?
Yeah, these are great questions. I'm dealing with this like this week. I was approached by a number of stakeholders in rural communities in Appalachia, where they talked about the issue that it is sometimes hard to get the amount of loan that they want for an energy efficient home because there aren't good comps on the market. So it's hard to appraise that home. So we are trying to work with communities across the country and also the appraisals, Fannie and Freddie and others to have to really help ensure that energy efficiency, clean energy are valued. Because if you're insulating your home well, you're using heat pumps, maybe you have on-site solar, your energy costs can be next to nothing. And that should allow you to get a larger loan. So we're doing a lot of work on education, but also trying to change policies with whether it's rural housing, whether it's the policies of FHA, the Fair Housing Administration, that's part of HUD, really trying to change and adapt policies so that we can value this clean energy transition in these individual homes.
Can I circle back to the embodied carbon question? Because I agree with what you said about these being simple decisions to make once you have the information. I think that's sort of the caveat. And so I wanted to ask you, what do you think are, when a builder or an architect is choosing materials, any materials really, and if they want to make those wise decisions when it comes to embodied carbon, particularly, what are some resources for determining in like accurately determining what the embodied carbon of a particular material is versus another?
Sure. Okay. So the Biden administration is doing a lot of work on embodied carbon. So we started working with the federal government is the largest real estate owner and actually I think it's in the world. We have lots of buildings. So we've been starting by looking at our federal portfolio, and we created a program called Buy Clean, where we're looking at the 4 largest emitters in terms of body emissions of materials. So looking at steel, glass, concrete, and asphalt. So we've started there. And setting standards for our federal portfolio to make sure that when we buy materials, we're trying to really move the market and buy materials with the lowest amount of emissions possible, and help establish the market. So, for example, concrete, if you look at emissions, it's like 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions. It's huge. So but you can make concrete in a way that doesn't have those emissions associated with it, but we need to really spur that market. So we're doing a lot of work with large producers of concrete, steel, and other materials. Now, steel might not be something you use in a home, right? But we are hoping that opportunities like better concrete, better glass, that by helping move the market, more products will become available that are lower embodied carbon. So that's one area. In terms of practically speaking, you're a builder, you're building a home today, you don't have time to wait. So looking at, there are resources online through different groups where you can look and you can do calculators for the home that you're building that show the embodied carbon of individual materials, but also let you help make choices. For example, could you be selecting an installation that has lower embodied carbon? Could you use a siding material with a lower embodied carbon? And so there are different tools that you can use to help make those decisions. There's also EPDMs, which are for your individual material. You can look up and see how much greenhouse gas emissions are associated with that individual material. So there's a lot of different opportunities, and I'd encourage you watch webinars, listen to podcasts to see what kind of materials are best for homes. But you can build a home right now that can almost store carbon. I mean, whether it uses, can you use some natural materials like straw? Can you use wood? Can you think about perhaps transitioning using wood flooring or linoleum flooring instead of carpet, depending on what the embodied carbon is? There's all these different decisions that can be made.
Well, I already feel better about the building business talking to you, Heather. So, what do you think, Brian? Should we try and get to some feedback and listener questions for Heather? Heather, have you listened to this show ever?
I have not, but I do subscribe.
Well, that explains why you agreed to be on it.
I know, exactly. Right. I do subscribe to the magazine, but no, I'm eager to hear some questions.
So, the conventional FHB podcast includes listener feedback and usually 3 or 4 questions. And the sophistication of our Fine Homebuilding podcast listeners never ceases to amaze me. They are very smart people. So I'm hoping you'll feel free to weigh in on their questions and feedback. So this first one comes from John. In episode 614, John wondered where his coworker's municipal water was going. He was billed for 76,000 gallons of water. Zach Kugler, who's the director of engineering at Snyder Engineering Company, which they handle, or at least he does, community and municipal water systems for clients. He writes, "Good morning, Patrick. Regarding the high meter reading, the best course of action would be for John's coworker to contact the utility and notify them of the high meter reading and ask them to reread it. As you noted, it could be as simple as a misread of this quarter's reading. John's coworker was smart to check to confirm the meter was not spinning without any usage, and barring any irrigation that took place late in the year or seasonal lines that may have a leak, my guess would be a bad read. Regardless, the utility has an interest to verify the accuracy of the reading and whether or not this amount of water is in fact being billed for or unaccounted for, because it could affect their ability to serve other customers. The utilities we work with have staff dedicated to leak detection and verifying items like this. I'm usually focused on water at the other end of the delivery process, but hopefully this helps. Best, Zach." So Heather, I think you'd agree a ton of energy goes into pumping water, and if you're losing 76,000 gallons or more, and many municipal water systems lose a very big percentage of their water, that's a bad thing. What are we doing about that?
Sure. I've had that same experience when I was working in affordable housing. I managed a portfolio of 90,000 apartments across the country.
How did you sleep?
Yeah, exactly. So we're trying to build and new construction or rehabs and do a really good job. But part of my job was trying to figure out how do you really ratchet down the energy consumption, the water consumption of that portfolio. First thing to do is exactly what this listener did, which is look at the bills. And so one of the issues I think that we see across the country is that it's hard. Some utilities aren't really great at releasing data. So we've just did a couple of weeks ago, the housing cabinet secretary, the energy secretary, and the head of the EPA wrote a letter to every utility in the country asking them to make it easier to provide historic energy data for buildings. And what we want to see is be able to use really simple tools so that you can monitor if your energy or water data is out of hand. And I think that helps so that you can plan projects better, but it also helps you discover issues just like what John mentioned that happened at his property. Which I had happened to me at properties where when I was managing that portfolio, I would see a big spike, and then I could go back and figure out what the problem was. And sometimes it was a meter problem, but sometimes it was actually just like a really bad leak, which happened more than once.
Then the next thing that happens is there's a sinkhole, right, or whatever. I mean, these are expensive problems.
Right. But if you're monitoring, then you can catch it. And if the tools are easy, then it becomes a totally different ballgame.
Well, good luck with that. Honestly, I think that's an important thing for municipal water systems to be focusing on for sure. This comes from Chris. This is a follow-up to discussion in podcast 95. It was about Chris's recent property acquisition And y'all may remember, Chris bought what was a former ice house in the Bay Area, and I think it's fair to say that he didn't buy much for probably an alarming amount of money because this building was really rough. He says, "Hey podcast, it's been a while. Sorry, my wife was excited to hear you talk about our project. We took your advice and had a house moving company shore up as much of the building as they could. They put in cribbing and steel beams to hold up the exterior walls. It's been great to be able to scaffold off these areas for additional shoring, especially while digging out for our new footings. From there, we started replacing that seems like half the original wood. There was a lot of wood boring beetle damage. There was also a lot of members that were bowed or crowned, and there were a lot of undersized members that needed replacement. We added PSLs, no steel, to replace the original double 2x beams. The clear story section will have 5 windows and a fair amount of Stimson straps to keep that part of the building together during seismic events. Our next challenge is to underpin the foundation and pour the grade beams and post footings. We found that the existing foundation didn't have an existing footing. Instead, it was only resting on top of the old slab. Anyone who saw this building would not have any trouble believing that this did not have an adequate foundation." He sent some photos. I hope you all will check it out. But Chris, thanks for checking in with us. I applaud your efforts to restore this building because it sure needed some help. Do you remember this building, Brian?
Yeah, I do. And it's interesting. I've become more and more fond over the years of restoration. I used to be very excited about new construction, and for some reason, as I've gotten older, I've become more and more fond of restoration. And it actually brings up something that I would like to, that I think we can ask Heather about, which is, this idea that it's exciting, right? We get allured by shiny objects. It's exciting to look at new, passive houses that just consume so little energy, and then zero energy houses or energy producing houses. People who are driving their cars, using the power that they're producing with solar panels. But we have a huge existing housing stock, and I also kind of think the mantra that the greenest house is the one that's already built. And so I kind of wonder if that's the way you see it. And kind of, I think we talked about this a little bit, sort of like what's the low hanging fruit in terms of your work in our existing housing stock?
Yeah, such a good question. So I am a huge fan on doing work with existing housing. We have 130 million buildings across the country, and they exist today. And that's more than 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from existing buildings. Most of those buildings are going to be here in 50 years. So figuring out how to invest in our existing housing is huge. When you were talking about training and this need to, train, what do you do with all of these existing homes? We need remodelers that are trained in building science. We need remodelers who that really know how to do air sealing, insulation, all this work. And so that's an area I think programs like the rebates and the 25C and 25D tax credits are going to help mobilize. But this approach of how do you take existing homes is just so important. So when you just told that crazy story about that home, I did something very similar to my home. We bought an 1850s farmhouse that was a total mess and needed a new foundation. And we ended up putting a new foundation under a house, which again, I watched too much This Old House as a little kid, thought that was a really easy thing to do. Ended up doing a lot of the construction work myself on my home. But when it comes to homes, it's simple things like having a blower door tiles done on your home, insulation and air sealing, looking at your mechanicals. Can you replace your mechanicals with a heat pump? Do you need to upgrade your electric when you do that work? It's about choosing the right appliances and doing simple things. If you can't afford to replace windows, which oftentimes don't have a great payback anyways, can you do storm windows? I did interior storm windows on my house, and it worked great. Our house is so comfortable as a result. And then if you're able to do renewables, that's great as a plus on these homes.
Heather, I got to ask you. So, we name names on this podcast, and I say that with some pride. Whose interior storm windows did you use? And was it expensive?
Yeah, so we used, and I'm going to forget the name, It's a husband and wife team from Connecticut. I can share the link afterwards.
Yeah, do
But
that.
Yeah.
they have a little shop where they do these custom interior storm windows, and they're great. We take them down in the summer, and in the winter you basically don't even see them. But it creates a really good air seal, and it more than doubles our value of the window. And we ended up in our house keeping our historic windows, which I ended up restoring myself. By the way, I love construction. I love building. I can't help myself. I've worked on construction crews, but I ended up restoring all my windows myself, and then did these interior storm windows, which were pretty affordable in the end.
Cool.
One thing to mention too is window dressers. I don't know if you've seen that company out of Maine, but it's really neat where we've done this in our town. These are storm windows interior storms that community members make. They use a wooden frame with a plastic cover over the top, but they're custom interior storm windows. And communities across the country can take advantage of this program where the window dressers, a nonprofit, will actually send that community tools to help make the windows. And then you can do a community build where then you end up installing, you end up making these storm windows for people's homes. And those are really inexpensive when you're thinking about affordable options.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's a good thing you're just mentioning your window restoration project now, because we probably would have spent the last 45 minutes talking about it if we'd known at the start of the show.
So did you have to move to DC, I want to ask?
No,
That's good.
I work, I am down there 1 or 2 weeks a month.
Okay. And you're able to live in your old house and enjoy all the work you've done, it sounds like.
I am, yeah.
What's
Yeah.
next on the horizon? Do you have projects coming up?
At my home?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I
Oh,
told you this
so
would happen.
okay, so this job is a 7-day-a-week job. There is no.
I've gotten
This is-
emails from you 7 of
Yeah.
the 7
Yeah,
days.
yeah. This is like my entertainment for the week, having this great conversation. So yeah, there's no home projects. But yeah, I mean, I just think that housing, and as we're thinking about this climate crisis, housing is a huge part of the solution. I mean, it's where we live. It's about affordability. It's about comfort. It's about really cutting emissions, and we can do it in homes. And that's where I get really excited. It's like how do you take all these existing homes and also build those new homes and make sure they're built as well as they can? But I'm looking forward to seeing more companies develop that can really help with whole home improvements that cut emissions, but also improve comfort, cut energy costs. I'm hoping that the IRA and bill will really start seeding some of those existing companies so they can expand, and new companies that can end up helping households all across America do more work.
You'll be interested to hear. I watched a home get a retrofit aero barrier, the spray applied air sealing system last week, and that's going to be an upcoming Fine Homebuilding feature, I expect. And that allows me a chance to plug the Fine Homebuilding podcast after show for all access members. We're going to be talking about upcoming Fine Homebuilding content in 2024. So stay tuned for that. All access members will talk about that after we are finished talking to Heather. And it delights me that you like working on houses, Heather. Thank you for being on the show very much.
This and the aero barrier is really interesting. Yep.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Some people accuse me of having a sponsorship deal with them because I'm so intrigued by it, but I really think it makes a lot of sense for our existing housing stock, because the house I saw, there's no other way to air seal it without destroying it. It's a early 20th century home, balloon frame construction, and honestly, I don't know how you'd, seal it any other way affordably. So pretty cool.
And what would be interesting is if at point of sale, if you could do the aero barrier, because it's a challenging to do once you're in the house, you have all your furniture. But what if
this house was just sold, and that's how they were able to do it. Had you been introduced to that before your job at the White House, Heather?
Yes. Yeah. I'm a building science geek. So I'm like very, very excited when I hear about new ways to do air sealing in buildings. I mean, it's like 40% of our heat loss is from air sealing or air leakage. So it's a huge opportunity.
You might be interested to learn that a number of our Fine Home Building podcast listeners have described it as the Fine Air Sealing podcast many times. So we talk about it a lot. This comes from Ken in Reno. Hey, podcast, a couple of inputs. One, you missed the entire point of a manifold for PEX, the hot water distribution system. There are comfort and energy and water saving advantages to using a manifold at or near the water heater and sending separate, correctly sized runs to each item. The advantage for, say, a remote master bathroom sink is my wife doesn't have to wait for the water to run for a million years and wasting it while it goes down the drain. Not only does it take it longer to get here, it wastes it. And repeat this for every remote fixture in the house. You would never do such a manifold with individual lines of copper because it would cost too much, but PEX lets you do this. Not sure I would do it with a cold though, other than the fact there are reduced fittings in inaccessible locations, as you noted. Are you familiar with these systems, Heather? What do you think?
Oh, I feel like I can't comment on these systems. I don't think I'm going to have a big comment. I mean, the idea of saving hot water is really important. If we're able to do any reclamation, I'm always interested in that. But I haven't had a lot of hands-on experience with the systems.
Well, I thought they seemed kind of expensive and unnecessary, but Ken disagrees. And he makes a good point. Yeah.
The often cited statistic of how much water goes down the drain while we wait for hot water to arrive at the tap is I can't recall it right now, but it's huge. It's a huge amount of water that an average household wastes when they're waiting for hot water to arrive. And maybe if you live early and you have a well and a septic and in an area with plenty of rain, maybe that's, and you're not paying for it, maybe that's not a big deal. But as we noted before, municipalities use a lot of energy moving water around, and you add up that statistic in every house in that municipality, and all of a sudden this has a big effect on energy consumption. Never mind comfort and everything else that goes along with it. And there are ways to do hot water delivery better, but they're not always easy solutions. So if the manifold system and the home runs in particular are helpful, then I think his point's well taken.
Heather, this brings a question to mind. So one of the complaints about plumbing codes is they require supply lines that are generally too big for the fixtures, and the result is a lot of hot water sits in pipes. Can the White House do anything about changing building codes or plumbing codes, electrical codes to make energy conservation the mindset, not that you just have tons of water at every opportunity?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I ran into this issue with some of the affordable housing properties that I was working on, where there was an interest in going to smaller pipes so that we were able to reduce some of those losses. And we did run into some code issues. So we are working really, really closely with developments of codes. So I actually oversee the National Initiative to Advance Building Codes. And we're working, as you know, the IECC 2024 is about to come out, the energy code for single family and low rise. That will be published soon. So the Department of Energy works very closely with the teams as that's being developed. We do a lot of stakeholder engagement to get input on codes, including plumbing codes. I talked to different organizations that are working on the plumbing codes actually recently. So these are issues that we're always trying to advance to make sure the best building science is included in these codes. And we're also looking at cost effectiveness too, making sure that what is put out makes sense. And then we're trying to work with communities to advance energy and building codes. So one thing when we were talking about going back to training is through the Inflation Reduction Act and then bill, $1.2 billion has been allocated to advancing energy codes and zero energy codes in communities across the country. Some of that's available to states, some of it's localities, some of it's to organizations that are doing training. And so there's a lot of work that's you're going to start seeing happening with more training to help get builders up to speed with the latest energy codes and zero energy codes. You're going to see more resources to help with raters and other players who are really important to make sure our buildings are built as efficiently as possible. So I'm very excited about those resources coming to more communities across the country.
So what was the role? You're an ambassador to building codes. Is that like the rough guess of title?
Yeah, I guess so. So we, the Biden administration in 2022 launched the National Initiative to Advance Building Codes, and they did it for a couple of reasons. First, as we're confronted with the climate crisis, the billions and billions of dollars that are being spent right now after major storm events, it's going through the roof. Building codes are incredibly important in terms of making sure buildings are more resilient. You see every dollar you spend on better building codes and better buildings results in like $11 worth of savings in a major disaster. You've probably seen the pictures of Hawaii, where the building that was built to code is standing around a lot of empty space where the other buildings are no longer. So we're doing a lot of work with communities to try to advance building codes, also within all our federally funded programs. And then part of that is also energy codes. Since 2006, the energy code for single family homes has improved by 40%, a 40% savings. And so we're trying to advance as much as possible for our federally funded programs, but also to support communities across the country to advance energy codes to really help save households money, but also to deal with this climate crisis. What I've heard a lot from people, from consumers, is when they buy a new home, they think that their home is built to be energy efficient. They just assume it is. They assume it's built to code. And that's, as we know, not necessarily the case. So we're trying to really raise the floor. And then beyond that, really support builders that want to even go further through doing things like DOE Zero Energy Ready Homes, Energy Star, so that they can then distinguish themselves in the market as they're selling homes or doing major retrofits or remodeling jobs.
Ken had an additional thought on our Mr. Cool heat pump for this discussion. For those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a do-it-yourself mini split. I guess they make all kinds of what am I trying to say? Heat pumps, central units and multi-splits and all this kind of stuff. But the interesting thing is that you don't need to have refrigeration training because the line sets are sealed and they have quick connects to connect them to the indoor and outdoor unit. And he says, on the Mr. Cool heat pump discussion, if you need a relatively inexpensive system for a workshop or garage, I say go for it. But people are installing multiple Mr. Cools for their entire house. This type of approach with bundled up coils and excess refrigerant lines, failing to use covered trays, lower performance, etc., has no place in fine home building. I think it violates the definition of fine. Leave important HVAC system design and installation to the pros who will also do proper manual J, routing, commissioning, etc. Otherwise, carry on. Regards, Ken from Reno. Well, thank you, Ken, very much. What do you think about the Mr. Cool systems, Heather?
So in my position as a White House person, I don't think I can comment on a specific piece of equipment.
No one listens to this show anyway, so you can.
So I won't comment on that product, but I think we are really excited about heat pumps, and I think that proper training is very important when you're installing heat pumps, especially to make sure that your refrigerant lines are working, that's properly charged, that you're sizing it appropriately for that home, and then also thinking about what climate you're in. Is your heat pump, if you're in a cold climate like I am, is your heat pump able to deal with that climate? There's a lot of heat pumps on the market that are. If you're in a hot and humid, maybe you're choosing a different heat pump. So looking for things like proper training, but also looking for like Energy Star Energy Star's EPA's program to make sure that the heat pump you're installing or other products, whether it's a refrigerator, washer, that they're as efficient as possible. So looking for those labels and correctly sizing the heat pump for your home is going to be really important too. And if your home is super efficient, maybe you only need one, and it can potentially be a mini split if it's a passive house. If it's an old home that's being retrofitted, that's going to look like a very different system. But there are lots of options on the market for many different climates.
Heather, I can't say it enough, but it's been just an absolute delight talking to you, and your knowledge on so many subjects has got me feeling better about the federal government, I gotta say. Thank you for being here. Is there anything you'd like to ask or tell our audience before we part company?
Sure, inspiring words. We are in a climate crisis, and it can be scary, especially as we see more disasters and they get closer to home. In my own community, we experienced some big disasters this summer. It's a scary time, but it's also this incredibly exciting time. We're in the midst of this clean energy transition that I cannot believe is happening. I mean, it's beautiful seeing the potential of what can happen within our communities as the grid gets cleaner, as our homes can become more efficient and more affordable. Builders, remodelers, designers, we all have this opportunity to work as part of the solution, and we can make our buildings and our homes zero emissions. We can do it, and we need to work together. The White House and the federal government wants to work with builders. We want to work with trades. We want to hear from you. We really want to hear from you on what would be helpful to get this work done. And for the first time in history, we have this Inflation Reduction Act, the largest climate bill in history, that is going to be bringing hundreds of billions of dollars to the building industry, which, by the way, EPA is developing a tool so that you can easily, and that's going to launch very soon, I'll share it with the program, but you can easily use the tool to see what kind of rebates, what kind of tax credits are available for the homes that you're working on to make this as easy as possible. But you're absolutely part of the climate solution, and it's about affordability and really, changing the world in a positive way. So very excited to be here and to work more with builders going forward.
If you have those suggestions, listeners, I will forward them directly to Heather, so I will know that they got there. So there you go.
And Heather, just so you know, Patrick always asks for parting words, and you just knocked it out of the park. We usually have nothing to say.
I'm going to hire Heather, Brian. I don't know about you.
I'm incredibly passionate about climate and buildings and homes in particular. So I'm so grateful to be here and have this opportunity to talk to all of you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Heather Clark, Brian, and Andres for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, review, share the show with others. Thanks very much for listening. Happy building. Stay tuned for the members-only podcast after show. Thanks.